Juan was the kind of man people called brave because they didn't know the half of it. At 34, he carried that mix of curiosity and skepticism that often pushed him into places others preferred to avoid. He had spent his whole life chasing sunsets from mountain peaks, diving into oceans so deep they felt like secrets. Yet, when it came to anything supernatural, he rolled his eyes as if the very idea were a bedtime story. Still, deep down, there was always that tiny flicker of what if tucked somewhere between his ribs, and tonight, that flicker was about to meet its match. His group of friends had known him since their teenage years, and together they were a mosaic of contradictions. There was Elena, sharp-tongued but soft-hearted, the kind of woman who cried at old songs but faced danger head-on. Marco, always pretending nothing scared him even though everyone knew he slept with a light on. Sophia, curious to the point of reckless, her empathy often getting her into trouble, and Daniel, the quiet observer, carrying a past heavier than he let on, always watching the others as if measuring which way fate might turn. They were imperfect, loud, loyal, and knitted together by years of shared chaos. Tonight's chaos had started the same way most of their wild ideas did, with a rumor whispered over cheap beers. The old house at the edge of town, abandoned for decades, its windows staring like hollow eyes. They'd all heard the stories about the tragedy that happened inside. Stories nobody could ever fully confirm, but everyone repeated with a shiver. Half joking, half fueled by adrenaline, they dared each other to go. Even Juan felt that electric buzz, the one that crawled up the spine when danger flirted with curiosity. And as they walked toward the decaying mansion, something in the air felt strangely expectant, as if the house itself had been waiting. The closer they got, the quieter the town behind them seemed, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Juan noticed how the streetlights ended abruptly, leaving only the moon to guide their steps. The wind brushed against his jacket in uneven pulses, almost like a warning whispered too softly to catch. Elena walked beside him, arms crossed, trying to hide the tremor running through her fingers. Marco kept cracking nervous jokes, each one thinner than the last, and Juan, despite himself, felt a strange mixture of thrill and unease blooming inside his chest. The house emerged from the shadows like a creature waking up slowly. Its wooden frame sagged under decades of storms, yet it still stood stubbornly, refusing to collapse. Sophia reached out toward the rusted gate, hesitating when it screeched open as if welcoming them. Daniel stayed a few steps behind, his breath shallow, eyes drifting toward the dark windows that seemed to watch them approach. Juan felt a sting of cold crawl down his spine, not from fear, he told himself, but from the night air. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something on the other side of that gate recognized him. As they walked through the overgrown yard, the scent of damp earth and rotting wood filled the air, thick enough to taste. Juan glanced at his friends, noticing how each step pulled out a different emotion from them. Sophia's excitement, Marco's bravado cracking, Elena's stubborn courage, Daniel's quiet dread. For a moment, he wondered what truly pushed them here tonight: curiosity, boredom, or the silent hope of proving something to themselves. The house loomed taller with every heartbeat, its dark silhouette swallowing the sky behind it, and just as their feet reached the front steps, the night shifted, subtle but unmistakable, like the first breath before a story changes. The porch groaned under their weight, each board complaining as if disturbed from a long sleep. Juan paused, letting his hand trail across the chipped rail, feeling splinters prick his fingertips like tiny warnings. Elena inhaled deeply, the kind of breath someone takes before stepping into cold water. Marco shifted beside her, pretending to stretch, but really trying to hide the shake in his knees. The air around them felt thicker now, almost syrupy, clinging to their skin. Juan glanced at the door and sensed a strange anticipation pulsing from within the house. Sophia reached for the doorknob first, her fingers trembling with a mix of courage and irresistible curiosity. The metal was icy, colder than the night itself, and she pulled back with a quiet gasp. Daniel murmured something about turning around, but his voice lacked conviction, as if he already knew none of them would. Juan stepped forward, placing his hand on the same spot where Sophia's warmth still lingered. The cold seeped into his palm, traveling up his arm like liquid frost. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of unseen eyes fixing on him. Someone, or something, seemed to lean closer from the other side. When the door finally creaked open, the inside exhaled a breath of stale, heavy air, carrying the faint smell of dust and forgotten memories. Their flashlights cut through the darkness in thin, nervous beams, revealing peeling wallpaper and a hallway stretching deeper than it should. Juan felt his heartbeat slow, not from calm, but from a strange pull drawing him inward. His friends exchanged uneasy glances, waiting for someone to say the obvious, that this was far enough. But words felt too fragile for the moment, too human. Juan stepped across the threshold, sensing that whatever waited inside had just awakened, and the next step would begin something none of them were prepared for. The moment Juan entered, the temperature dropped so sharply it felt like stepping into winter. His breath floated in thin clouds, drifting through the stale air as if the house were tasting each exhale. The walls seemed to hum quietly, a low vibration just beneath the threshold of hearing. Elena whispered his name, her voice small, swallowed almost immediately by the darkness. Marco swept his flashlight across the foyer, but the beam flickered, stuttering like a heartbeat under strain. And somewhere ahead, a faint whisper slithered through the hall, too soft to be speech, yet heavy enough to carry meaning. Sophia's light caught a picture frame on the floor, cracked glass reflecting their anxious faces back at them. She crouched to pick it up, but the frame slid away on its own, scraping across the wooden boards with deliberate slowness. Daniel stumbled back, his hand instinctively gripping the wall as if steadying himself against rising panic. Juan felt that pull again, subtle, like fingers curling around his collarbone from the inside. He told himself it was nothing, just nerves playing tricks, but deep in his chest, something twisted with a quiet sense of recognition, as though the house itself had already learned his name. A door at the end of the hallway creaked shut without anyone touching it, the sound cracking through the silence like a warning shot. Marco muttered that they should leave, but his voice wavered, betraying fear he could no longer mask. Elena stepped closer to Juan, her shoulder brushing his, grounding him with a warmth that felt out of place in the cold gloom. Shadows along the walls shifted in slow, unnatural motions, stretching and retracting like living things. Sophia murmured that it felt like they weren't supposed to be there, like they'd interrupted something. And as they stood frozen, the flickering lights overhead steadied for a moment, revealing a long corridor waiting for them, calling them deeper. They moved deeper into the corridor, each step pressing into the dust, as if disturbing footprints that had been waiting for decades. Juan's flashlight flickered again, then steadied, illuminating wallpaper that hung in curled strips like old wounds. The air smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic, sharp enough to sting the back of the throat. Elena rubbed her arms, whispering that she felt cold spots, pockets of freezing air shifting around them like passing figures. Marco tried to joke about ghosts, but his voice cracked halfway through, and beneath it all, a soft thump echoed from upstairs, rhythmic, almost familiar. Sophia stopped abruptly, holding up a hand as if she could sense something the others couldn't. The shadows around her stretched a little too far, bending at strange angles before snapping back into place. Daniel's breath hitched, his childhood memories rushing back, nights he spent hiding under the blankets while his father swore he heard voices in their old farmhouse. He never believed those stories. Not really, but now the fear crawled up his spine with the same slow certainty he felt as a child. Juan glanced at him, seeing the tightness in his jaw, the way he clenched his fists to stop them from shaking. And in that moment, the house groaned, as if reacting to the emotional tension rising among them. A sudden crash echoed from a nearby room, sending Elena stumbling into Juan's side. The sound rang out like something heavy hitting the floor, followed by the unmistakable scrape of furniture being dragged. Marco swore under his breath, stepping back until his shoulders hit the wall. Juan felt a surge of instinct to move toward the noise, despite knowing no rational person would. That strange pull tightened again, warm and unsettling in the center of his chest. Sophia grabbed his wrist, her eyes wide with worry, silently asking him not to go. Yet the house felt alive now, fully awake, and whatever stirred inside was reaching for him with growing urgency. The hallway seemed to tilt subtly as they approached the room where the crash had come from, as if the house were guiding their steps with a quiet, invisible hand. Juan led the way, though he couldn't explain why, only that something inside him kept urging him forward. The flashlight beams jittered across the walls, revealing handprints smudged into the dust, too small to belong to any of them. Elena's breath hitched as she noticed them, her fingers curling around Juan's sleeve for reassurance. Daniel muttered that the house wasn't just haunted, it was responsive, and with each step, the atmosphere thickened until the air felt almost like water. When they reached the doorway, The room inside was darker than the rest of the house, as if light refused to cross the threshold. Sophia shined her flashlight inside, but the beam dimmed the moment it passed the doorframe, swallowed whole. Marco cursed softly, his voice trembling, and stepped back again, clearly fighting the urge to run. Juan stared into the room, feeling an eerie warmth glide across his cheek, like someone brushing a gentle hand against his skin. His heart hammered, not in fear, but in a strange sensation that felt almost like being recognized. Elena whispered for him to stay close, yet something inside him leaned toward the darkness. Then, from somewhere deep within the house, a slow, drawn-out creak echoed through the halls, like an inhalation from an unseen chest. The floor beneath them trembled, subtle enough to question, but strong enough to remind them they were no longer in a place governed solely by the living. Daniel grabbed Sophia's arm, urging her to step back. Marco's flashlight flickered wildly now, creating jittering shadows that danced across the walls like restless spirits. And Juan, standing at the edge of that unlit room, felt the pull intensify, gentle, almost intimate, as if whatever dwelled here had finally awakened fully, waiting for him to take the next step. Juan took a slow step into the dim room, and the air shifted instantly, wrapping around him like a cold embrace. The others hovered at the doorway, afraid to cross the threshold. His flashlight dimmed to a soft glow, barely illuminating the floating dust motes that shimmered like tiny, suspended stars. In the center of the darkness, a faint silhouette began to materialize, fragile, wavering, almost unsure of itself. Elena whispered his name, but her voice felt miles away. Juan's breath caught as the shape lifted its head, revealing eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it felt ancient. The temperature dropped again, but Juan didn't pull back. Instead, he stepped closer, drawn by a mix of fear and empathy he couldn't explain. A soft whisper brushed against his ear, not quite a word, more like the echo of one. His skin prickled, not with dread, but with something achingly familiar, as if a memory he never lived was tugging at him. Sophia watched from the doorway, tears gathering as old feelings resurfaced. Memories of watching her mother fade in a hospital room filled with machines and cold light. Daniel gripped the doorframe, fighting the sinking feeling that they were losing Juan to something none of them could understand. And Marco held his breath, unable to move, afraid one sound would shatter whatever delicate moment was unfolding. The spirit's outline drifted closer, and Juan felt a soft, icy touch graze the back of his hand. It wasn't sharp or aggressive, it was hesitant, almost tender, like the touch of someone afraid he might pull away. His heart tightened, aching with a sense of compassion he didn't know how to explain. Elena's voice cracked as she begged him to step back, her fear tangled with memories of losing people she wasn't ready to let go of. But Juan stayed rooted, mesmerized by the entity's silent plea. And somewhere deep in his chest, something shifted, as though a door inside him had opened just a crack, inviting something in that had been waiting for far too long. Juan felt the room pulse gently, almost like a heartbeat synchronized with his own. The spirit hovered inches from him now, its sorrow-filled eyes glimmering with a human softness that made his chest tighten. The outline of a face flickered, shaping briefly into something young, fragile, and burdened by memories trapped in the walls around them. Marco whispered that they had to leave, but his words dissolved into the cold air as if the house refused to carry them. Elena's fingers dug into her palms, torn between pulling Juan back and trusting that he wasn't in danger. And Juan, standing there motionless, sensed that the entity wasn't reaching for his fear, it was reaching for his understanding. A sudden drop in temperature brushed against Juan's cheek, followed by the light pressure of something tracing the line of his jaw. The touch sent a shock through him, not painful, but heartbreakingly gentle, like someone trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. Sophia wiped at her face, overwhelmed by the intimacy of the moment, reminded of the nights she sat beside her grandmother's bed, listening to stories meant to keep the darkness away. Daniel exhaled shakily, recognizing the conflict on Juan's face, the silent pull between reason and emotion, safety and compassion. The spirit tilted its head toward him, and for a fleeting second, Juan saw a flash of a memory that wasn't his, a hand reaching out in desperation, a scream swallowed by shadow. He staggered, not from fear, but from the weight of someone else's pain. The silhouette flickered, then steadied, as though gathering strength from Juan's presence. Without warning, a whisper, clear this time, brushed his mind, not his ears. His name, spoken with a softness that made his knees weaken. Elena gasped, recognizing the shift, the connection forming right in front of her. Marco reached for Juan's arm, but the spirit's presence pushed him back with a cold gust that felt more like a plea than a threat. Juan's heart pounded, his pulse echoing in his ears as emotions he didn't own washed over him. Longing, loneliness, and a desperate need to be seen. And somewhere behind that swirl of feelings, the spirit showed him a glimpse of a tragedy buried deep inside the house, hinting that this was only the beginning of what it wanted him to uncover. Juan took a shaky breath as the spirit drifted closer, its form wavering like a candle flame caught between worlds. The air around him vibrated softly, a hum that resonated in his bones more than his ears. He lifted a hand without fully realizing it, guided by instinct rather than intention. The spirit reacted instantly, its outline brightening with a faint glow, as if his gesture offered it strength. Elena whispered that this wasn't right, her voice trembling with that helpless fear born from watching someone step into danger willingly. But Juan felt strangely calm, as though standing at the edge of something inevitable. Images flickered in his mind again, brief flashes of a life marked by isolation, heartbreak, and a final moment of terror that clung to the house like cobwebs. The sensations were so vivid he almost staggered. The smell of smoke, the sound of a door slamming, the feeling of cold hands reaching for help that never came. Sophia pressed a hand to her mouth, sensing the emotional weight pressing down on him even if she couldn't see the images directly. Daniel stepped forward, torn between protecting Juan and respecting this uncanny connection forming right before them. Marco's breath shook with frustration, fear twisting deeper with every second they lingered, and Juan, overwhelmed but unable to pull away, felt the spirit anchor itself to him, not with force, but with desperate familiarity. A cold breeze spiraled around them, lifting dust from the floor in small circling wisps. The spirit's voice, or what passed for it, echoed faintly inside Juan's chest, calling out not just his name but something deeper, something waiting to be understood. He felt his heart ache with an emotion that wasn't his, a loneliness so profound it felt like a void reaching through time. Elena stepped closer, her eyes pleading, silently begging him to return to them, but Juan barely heard her, as the spirit drifted backward, deeper into the dark hallway beyond the room, inviting him to follow. And with every heartbeat, that invitation grew stronger, tugging him toward a truth the others were terrified to see unravel. The house groaned and shivered around them, as if aware of Juan's growing connection to the spirit. Each step he took deeper into its shadows sent vibrations through the wooden floors, rattling frames and shaking dust from the ceiling. Elena's voice trembled as she called after him, her words swallowed by the oppressive air. Marco grabbed Daniel's arm, both of them frozen, feeling the room thrum with a life they couldn't comprehend. Juan barely noticed. The pull toward the spirit was magnetic, compelling. More than curiosity, something essential was at stake. Every fiber of his being told him he was crossing a line he might never return from, yet he couldn't stop moving forward. Suddenly, the hallway twisted in ways that defied logic, floors sloping at impossible angles, and shadows stretching like fingers to touch them. A door slammed behind them with such force that Elena stumbled, clutching Marco for support. Objects levitated briefly, suspended in air before crashing back down with chaotic violence. The group's panic rose, voices overlapping, a chorus of fear trying to pierce the supernatural chaos. Juan felt a strange serenity in contrast, as if the house were protecting him while tormenting the others. And at the end of the hallway, a faint glow signaled the room where the spirit waited, patient yet desperate, a beacon pulling him ever closer. Juan's mind swirled with confusion and emotion as fragments of the spirit's past flashed before him. Loss, betrayal, love that ended too soon, and a life abruptly cut short. He understood now that the entity wasn't malevolent, it was trapped, aching to resolve a story left unfinished. Elena stepped beside him, her hand brushing his shoulder, offering comfort, grounding him in the fragile boundary between worlds. Marco shouted for him to stop, but the words were powerless against the invisible tether that bound him to the spirit. Daniel clenched his fists, torn between fear and awe, witnessing Juan slipping into a realm they couldn't follow, and Juan felt a deep, aching empathy, realizing that the choice he was about to make could change everything for him, the spirit, and his friends. The walls seemed to pulse with an unseen heartbeat, shadows dancing violently as if the house itself were alive and aware of Juan's hesitation. Every object that fell, every whisper that echoed carried weight, tiny warnings disguised as chaos. Elena grabbed his arm, her grip firm but shaking, and whispered that he had to choose, to resist the pull or risk being lost entirely. Marco's voice cracked as he shouted over the rising noise, pleading with Juan to come back. But Juan felt the spirit brush against his consciousness, soft, tentative, and almost human, asking for something more than freedom, a connection, recognition, maybe even forgiveness. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste, mingling fear, longing, and urgency into one suffocating force. A sudden gust of cold air slammed into him, spinning dust and loose papers in a mini whirlwind, carrying with it a fleeting fragment of memory, a promise whispered long ago, a life interrupted, a love that lingered beyond death. Juan's chest tightened as he realized the spirit's longing was real, that every flicker of shadow, every sigh of the floorboards, was a manifestation of unresolved pain. Daniel and Marco moved closer, trying to anchor him to the world they shared, but the closer they came, the more the house resisted, groaning and cracking like it resented their interference. Elena's eyes welled with tears as she reached for him again, silently begging him to remember who he was. Juan's hand hovered over the spectral figure now, almost brushing it, feeling its warmth and weight in a way that defied logic. And in that instant, the world split, half anchored in reality, half entwined with the spirit's sorrow. The house seemed to stretch and shift with each heartbeat, corridors elongating, floors trembling, shadows converging in ways that made the air itself feel unstable. The spirit's presence pressed against Juan, not threatening but insistently urgent, demanding action, demanding acknowledgement. Marco's voice rose in desperation. Elena's sobs cut through the thick air, and Daniel's fists pounded against a wall in frustration. Juan's mind raced, torn between the tangible fear surrounding him and the deep empathy pulling him toward the entity. He realized, with a knot in his stomach, that helping the spirit move on might mean leaving part of himself behind. And as the house moaned and the spirit's whisper grew into a soft, imploring call, Juan understood that a decision had to be made, one that could either save them all or bind them forever. The house reacted violently as Juan hesitated, walls groaning, floors buckling, and shadows stretching toward him like dark fingers. Each step forward made the air colder, sharper, almost cutting, as if warning him that time was running out. Elena's voice broke through the chaos, calling his name with a mix of fear and desperation, but the pull of the spirit was relentless. Marco and Daniel tried to form a human barrier, arms outstretched, but the house's energy pushed them back. Juan's heart pounded, torn between loyalty to his friends and the sorrowful eyes that held him captive. The spirit hovered, almost tangible now, reaching out in a silent plea that he couldn't ignore. Juan felt the weight of every choice pressing on him: stay tethered to the spirit and risk losing everything familiar, or let it go and face the ache of separation. He glimpsed fleeting visions of the tragedy, the life stolen, the sorrow endured, and the love abandoned too soon. Elena's hand brushed his shoulder, grounding him, reminding him that he wasn't alone even as the house tried to consume his focus. Marco shouted again, warning him of the danger, while Daniel's wide eyes mirrored his own confusion and fear. And amidst the chaos, Juan sensed that the spirit didn't desire harm, only liberation, something it had been denied for decades. The tug of empathy and connection was unbearable, a storm raging inside him. A sudden, violent shudder ran through the house, throwing them all off balance. The air filled with whispers, both frantic and mournful, echoing through the halls, tugging at memories, regrets, and unspoken promises. Juan's gaze locked with the spirit's, understanding that a choice was inevitable. A bridge between worlds was forming, and only he could cross it. Elena's tears glimmered in the dim light as she silently begged him to come back, while Marco and Daniel held on, refusing to let go despite the supernatural force at play. Juan's heart ached with the impossible weight of responsibility, knowing that what he did next would define not just the spirit's fate, but theirs all. And as the house shivered around them, the spirit's whispered call reached him again, drawing him toward the unknown, toward a decision that could not wait. The house convulsed violently, groaning like a wounded beast, walls twisting and floors collapsing under invisible pressure. Dust and debris swirled in chaotic currents, catching the faint light and casting eerie shadows across terrified faces. Juan stood at the center, heart hammering, feeling the spirit's presence coiling around him like smoke, both comforting and suffocating. Elena shouted for him to run, but her voice barely reached him through the roar of the house's awakening. Marco and Daniel struggled to pull her back, debris falling dangerously close, the air thick with tension and fear. Juan realized the moment had come. There was no turning back, and every heartbeat carried the weight of a choice that could change their lives forever. The spirit's form shimmered, growing more distinct, its eyes filled with an intense, pleading sadness that made Juan's chest tighten unbearably. He felt the entity's emotions as if they were his own: despair, longing, and the ache of decades spent trapped in solitude. A floorboard snapped beneath him, a violent reminder that danger was real, but the pull toward the spirit was irresistible, almost magnetic. Elena and the others shouted, but their words were drowned in the sounds of the house twisting and groaning, walls bending impossibly, shadows lashing at them like dark fingers. Juan's mind raced, torn between saving his friends and responding to the spirit's silent plea. Every instinct screamed to protect them, yet his heart ached to give the trapped soul the release it desperately sought. Suddenly, the air shimmered and the temperature dropped, a sharp contrast to the chaos around them, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The spirit hovered, its gaze locking onto Juan, radiating both gratitude and sorrow, a silent promise of what might come if he chose correctly. Elena's tears glistened in the flickering light as she reached out, begging him to step away from the edge of this invisible divide. Marco and Daniel braced themselves, ready to grab him if he faltered, yet powerless against the unseen tether binding him. Juan's hand hovered near the spirit, and a whisper echoed, not through ears, but through the depths of his soul. The moment stretched, a heartbeat between worlds, demanding a choice that would define who survived and who remained trapped in the house forever. The house erupted in violent chaos, walls bending and floors splitting as if it were breathing in anger and fear. Debris flew through the air like shards of glass, forcing Marco and Daniel to shield Elena, their hearts pounding with terror. Juan felt the spirit pressing closer, a tangible weight of grief and longing, each pulse of emotion echoing in his chest. Every instinct screamed for him to flee, to drag his friends to safety, yet the connection was unbreakable, a fragile thread of trust spanning worlds. He caught the spirit's gaze, sorrow and hope intertwining, compelling him to act. Elena's trembling voice pleaded for him to return, a lifeline anchoring him to the reality still within reach. Suddenly, shadows twisted violently around them, forming shapes that mimicked fears long buried. Floors buckled underfoot, sending splintered wood and dust spiraling, threatening to trap them in the house's malevolent embrace. Juan's heart raced as he weighed the impossible choice: save his friends and leave the spirit to its torment, or risk everything to grant it freedom. The spirit hovered, almost shimmering, its silent cries threading through the room like a song of desperation. Marco and Daniel shouted warnings, their voices nearly drowned out by the groaning walls, yet Juan understood that the time for hesitation had passed. Every second stretched into eternity, each heartbeat carrying the weight of lives in the balance. A sudden gust of icy wind slammed through the hallway, rattling broken windows and sweeping up dust in ghostly swirls. The spirit extended a faint, ethereal hand, urging Juan forward, whispering promises of release and peace if he dared. Elena grabbed his arm again, her eyes wide, tears streaming, anchoring him to the reality of his friend's fear. Juan felt the unbearable tension between two worlds pressing against him, a decision that could either free the spirit or condemn them all. Daniel and Marco braced themselves, ready to pull him back, but the choice was his alone, and the house's energy surged, sensing the impending resolution. And as the air thickened with anticipation, Juan realized the moment of reckoning was at hand, and nothing could delay it. Juan took a deep, shuddering breath as the spirit hovered closer, the air crackling with energy and sorrow. In that instant, he understood what had to be done, not for glory, not for courage, but for release, for the lingering soul trapped in decades of pain. He reached out, letting the connection flow, feeling the weight of grief, love, and regret wash through him like a tidal wave. Elena clutched his shoulder, Marco and Daniel bracing themselves, but Juan didn't falter. He let the spirit guide him. The house seemed to hold its breath, as if even its twisted walls knew that the final act was unfolding. Every shadow, every creaking floorboard, Every whisper of wind seemed to participate in this suspended moment between worlds. A blinding surge of light erupted from the spirit, washing through the house and scattering shadows into nothingness. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, leaving only a faint chill, like the memory of sorrow, lingering but softened. Juan felt the spirit's presence diminish, not vanish, but finally at peace, leaving behind a profound emptiness mixed with relief. Elena exhaled shakily, tears streaming freely, and Marco and Daniel sank to the floor, hearts still racing but bodies safe. Dust settled, broken beams shifted back into uncanny stillness, and the house exhaled, quiet now, almost mournful, but no longer threatening. Juan realized they had survived, but the echo of what had transpired would follow him, a whisper of the boundary between life and lingering spirits. As they stumbled toward the exit, the front doors creaked open, as if inviting them into the cool night air. Juan paused, feeling a fleeting warmth, the faintest brush of the spirit's hand on his own, a lingering connection that neither time nor fear could erase. The friends spilled into the moonlit yard, hearts pounding, lungs gasping, the mansion looming behind them in solemn silence. Though they were safe, the experience had changed them. Fear mingled with awe, and every glance back carried a whisper of the unseen. And deep inside, Juan knew that some part of him would always remain tethered to that house, to the spirit, to the night where worlds collided, leaving questions unanswered and emotions unresolved. The wind rustled the trees, as if murmuring a warning or perhaps an invitation, and Juan's gaze lingered, knowing the story wasn't truly over.